Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 113 of Sports Daily College Basketball. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me. And tonight, Mike, we're going to recap sort of the last weekend of college hoops. We're recording this on Tuesday. Obviously, a huge slate tonight. So those games are obviously going to happen before many people see this. But the title, Mike, is Freshman Phenom Steal the Show. And if you are a sort of outside, you know, observer of the sport, you would say, "Oh, well, of course, the media's been hyping up these three freshmen as some really great players, and while they have those three, certainly have not done poorly by any measurement, it's a couple of other freshmen who are getting some of the biggest headlines. The one on the cover is North Carolina's Caleb Wilson. Mike, Tar Heels and Wilson beat Kansas at the Dean Dome on Friday night. Wilson, the best player on the team. Peterson on Kansas, they went toe-to-toe for the first half. A good run by the Heels to end the half, and then it was all baby blue in the second half. So, what are your thoughts on some of this freshman class as a whole, and then what Wilson and Peterson did on Friday night?
Yeah, it really is surprising. You'd think in this era of college basketball, we wouldn't be talking so much about freshmen, but this year, this freshman class is just so good. Whether we're talking about Koa Pete or Caleb Wilson, tragedy for North Carolina that Seth Trimble is likely out for the rest of the year, if not for the next couple of months. There's no timetable on his return. But even for Kansas, you talk about in this game, Darian Peterson. He's a phenomenal freshman. I think he's going to have to be phenomenal, though, every single night for Kansas to compete for a Big 12 or to go far in the tournament. But getting back to Caleb Wilson, absolutely outstanding in his first important college basketball game. 24 points, 7 rebounds to go along with 4 assists and 4 steals. He was doing it on all ends of the floor in this game. Just really impressive stuff for the young man. And you have to start asking the question, who's the best freshman? And it's so early on in the year to ask this question, but there's a lot of really good ones this year. A really talented freshman class, way more than last year, that's for sure.
But I think it's at every level, Mike. We see a lot of power conference opponents playing mid majors, and a lot of mid major teams have freshmen as their best players. Also,
Yeah.
my team Fairfield, we start two freshmen in the front court, and they've been really solid so far, two double doubles. So I think you're sort of seeing it at every level. In the age of the portal, the naysayers were saying like Rick Pitino, I'm not even looking at high school players this year. Well, that might have to change because
Yeah, maybe he should be.
I think we've got 7 or 8 like amazing freshmen RN. We're 2 or 3 games into the year. Like this is going to be a little bit different for the sport. We're going back 10 years to the Calipari Kentucky teams and the Andrew Wiggins, Joel Embiid Kansas teams. But in terms of North Carolina, Mike, we weren't super high on them coming into the year. Wilson is certainly better than advertised. He was the 5th-ranked freshman in the class, and he took some serious offense to that. He was not happy with being ranked 5th. He thought he deserved higher. He was mad that he didn't get the ball passed to him as much in the McDonald's All-American game. One of them, the players, was Darren Peterson, who was across the way on Friday night. But the pieces for North Carolina might fit a little bit better than we initially thought. Now, Seth Trimble did have the injury, like you said, Mike. Something happened in the weight room. He needs to get surgery on his elbow, or surgery on a broken bone on his elbow. And I think the most optimistic of reports are ACC play. But the surgery has to happen, and then you've got to make a decision from there. So it's a big damper on what happened on Friday night. Trimble was there last year. He's the only real contributor on the team, to my knowledge, that was there last year. Visar and Wilson look really good in the front court, but for me, the questions are still in the back court.
Yeah, absolutely. And who's going to fill that senior leadership void with Trimble not on the court? You look at North Carolina, they played with 9 guys, but really they only had 6 guys that played more than 10 minutes in this game. So you're going to have to find some sort of level of minutes that's going to come, that's not Seth Trimble. Seth Trimble played 36 minutes in this game. He played phenomenally, distributed the ball really well, but also as a 6'3" point guard, he got 8 rebounds. I don't think that's talked enough about in this game. And that was crucial to the result of this game. You looked at how Kansas dominated the boards 39-27 against Kansas. That was one of the ways that they won this game, or one of the reasons they won this game. So that's going to be a huge void that they're going to have to collect. And they don't have, the easiest out of conference schedule. They're going to miss a lot of big games with him out. They're playing Michigan State. They've got Kentucky. They've got Georgetown. Georgetown might be a pretty decent team this year. So they've got some good games. And then they've got Ohio State in one of those games. Conference. Well, no, that's not a conference game as well. So they're going to have some tough games down the road. They're going to have to find a way to win without Seth Trimble.
And I was a little bit wrong earlier. They were actually down at half, and then the big run came early in the second half. Kansas, looked pretty good in this one, at least in the first half. But Mike, when Peterson goes off the floor, and he had to with foul trouble in this one, like they're not even close to the same team. Obviously, that's got to be a little bit alarming.
And he's going to have extraordinary output every single night for Kansas to compete. In this game, you looked at the 12 minutes that he missed. North Carolina just waxed him, right? It wasn't even close in that time. And you looked at it with 28 minutes, he's able to get 22 points. He played an outstanding basketball game, but the cast around him just is not good enough for Kansas. And I think I'm really worried about that. I don't, it's still early on. It was a road game. Road teams don't do very well early on in the season, but I just don't see the pieces for Kansas this year. I just don't.
Yeah, we initially thought 5 or 6 seed. Mike, I think 8 or 9 might be more likely. And of course, they've obviously looked really good in. They've improved as the season has gone along most of the time during Bill's stuff. Now the last 2 years, they've certainly fallen off, but I think Badunga is good, and he's got to be that other go-to guy. And he played 36 minutes here. I mean, that is a lot of wear and tear. You're probably not going to get the best efficiency numbers if you're, legit 7-footers running 36 minutes up and down the floor in a game with a lot of possessions. So they're going to have to. They are good enough where they're going to get enough good wins to make the tournament. They just have too many good players, or they have good enough players, but they don't have a lot of depth. I'm a little bit worried for them that if the Big 12 is anywhere near where it looks like it's going to be, that they're going to get dragged into the middle, and they'll win 9 or 10 games in the Big 12, be 21-13 on Selection Sunday, and they could be anywhere from a 7 to 10 seed.
Yeah, I think they're going to be right there competing with Baylor and maybe even Kansas State for that middle of the road in the Big 12. I don't want to pivot too much to the Big 12, but another team that, I picked higher on than most, people had them way at the bottom. Oklahoma State was impressive on Saturday. They put or I think it was Sunday, they put a beating on Texas A&M at home. That's something we haven't seen. We haven't seen any life out of that program in years. So
Yeah.
that's another team that might be competing with Kansas in the middle part of that conference.
Yeah, that was a interesting one. Texas A&M brings in Bucky McMillan from Samford, and their play style is really crazy. They double basically every screen, a ball screen, and it's called Bucky Ball Full Court Press. Patino ball times 100. Are we sure it's going to work at the high major level? They won a ton of games at Samford, and I don't mean to take away that by any means, but they got boat raced by a solid team here. I mean, 5 double-digit scores for Oklahoma State. They have a few good players, but that's the sort of middle-of-the-pack teams don't typically do that in games against other middle-of-the-pack teams. So I'm worried for Texas A&M. And Oklahoma State, Mike, it always seems like there's 1 or 2 of the teams with new coaches every year that are really surprising and fun early in the year. and as more film comes out on them, once you get to like the middle of conference play, they start to not be as good, but they've done so much work early that Oklahoma State at 20-12 is going to be easily in the tournament because they looked good and picked up enough good wins early, even though they're 4-6 in their last 10 or something like that. But yeah, I watched some of this one. I was really impressed. I mean, they took it to Texas A&M. When you play a team like that, when you play a team like St. John's that wants to pressure you and wants to speed you up, you can't. That only works if you don't want to be sped up,
Yeah.
and it worked. If you can't speed up somebody already going as fast as they possibly can, that and that happened at the Garden too, Mike, where Alabama and Nate Oates went up to New York to play Rick Pitino and St. John's, and this was one where Alabama sort of held serve the entire way. They end up winning by 7, but they were up by 5-12 for the entirety of this one. This one was 103-96 Crimson Tide. Final on 25, Holloway with 21. The names might not be as recognizable from Alabama as we've had in the past few years, Mike. And we even said last week that the expectations might be a little bit lower. But based on that offensive output, they might be as good as they were before.
Yeah, we definitely got it a little bit wrong. It seems early on in the year about Alabama, we thought they might lack a little bit of star power. But putting up 103 in the Garden against what's supposed to be a pretty good defensive team is really shocking. Look, Alabama's offense is there. I think we've learned that. That's been established. They have an offensive juggernauts down there in Tuscaloosa. But the question is going to be, are they going to be able to defend against other teams? Look, they didn't defend St. John's very well. They allowed 52 in the second half. They had a chance to win this game, but look, it's still a team with so much firepower on offense. In their first 2 games, over 90 points in both of them. They're going to have a really fun one in a couple of days, Thursday night against Purdue. Is that game neutral court or is that a home game for them?
I believe that's a home game because they went up to Mackey last year. Or they went to Indy.
Yep.
They went to Indy last year. Is it Birmingham? Fake neutral?
It's no, it's in Tuscaloosa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's gonna be a fun one.
I'm starting
to
think
it's gonna be a really fun one.
I believe Purdue played them at Mackey last year and A&M at whatever the basketball stadium in Indy is now called, Gainbridge. But yeah, we've seen some fake neutrals. The on-campus games, like the North Carolina game we talked about, Mike, and I guess Madison Square Garden isn't on campus, but when you get, the team's actual arena is pretty filled, it just provides for a great atmosphere. Like, St. John's fans brought it to this one. And the thing about, speeding teams up that already want to be sped up, like that, it just didn't work for St. John's. I feel like this was just a bad matchup for them. Alabama, shot it well, but they didn't play out of their minds. I think they probably win this matchup 7 out of 10 times. They shot 11 for 35 from 3. There are days where they're making 15 or 16 of those.
That's to only make 11 threes and they scored over 100 points is crazy.
Yeah.
But I think the concern here with maybe this is an overreaction, but with Pitino teams last year and this year, they got upset against Alabama. Maybe the St. John's team just isn't able to, Arkansas, sorry. Yeah. Maybe this Alabama or this St. John's team just isn't able to put up with the athleticism in the SEC. The SEC is probably the most athletic conference. The Big 12 is the most physical. Maybe they don't have the physicality or the athleticism rather, not the physicality to maintain it with some of these power programs.
Well,
I think it's also going to be really concerning because Big East play is not going to prepare these guys for March, I don't think.
And I do think they do have that, Mike, but when you are you can just sort of, beat the will out of some teams in the Big East and win 80-62 and make 6-7 threes, and you can't do that against some of these teams that play really fast and up and down. And, when you can't the reason why Alabama's been they have not really had a 5. They had Amori, but he didn't really play a lot of minutes. They were playing Grant Nelson at the 5. They've had some people go through that program at the 5 where they're not really a threat offensively. You can speed can go around physicality. The court is big enough, and I feel like when St. John's, that can't be a strength of theirs, that they are susceptible to getting snake bit. I think the game against Arkansas last year was a little bit of a fluke. It was just like a really bad offensive performance, and you had a team that had a ton of talent, was terrible early, and that we're playing like a
Coming
top
together at the right
25
time.
team, not
Yeah.
really a 10 seed. But in this one, like they were never in a good. You never thought, after let's say in the second half, you never felt like they were going to win the game. I think they pulled it back
No,
to 5 or 6 a couple times, and then Alabama hit a three, or responded with an and one. But yeah, Alabama might be able to compete at the top of the SEC. That didn't look
but
any different than the last few years.
not at all. And one thing too, I think for St. John's looking forward is going to see how they can compete with speed, right? Iowa State is going to be a quick team. That's a fast-paced team. Kentucky too. It's another game that they play. Those are two up and down the court games. They're going to have to learn a lot from this one in order to be able to compete and win in those two games.
And let's turn it over to St. John's, Mike. I think we thought that fifth in the preseason poll was probably a little bit too high and that they were a bit overrated there. And I think this game just proved it a little bit.
Yeah.
They have a solid team. I think they're probably a top 15 team, easily 1A. Easily the top two in the Big East. That seems like there might be a really big gap after that, after them and UConn. But you got 27 and 10 from Ejiofor. Bryce Hopkins looks good. He had 19. You get 14 from Sellers and Jackson. Like, for all of St. John's flaws, I don't know if this was like a bad performance for them. This might just be what their roster is capable of, and there's good matchups and bad matchups for it.
Yeah. I mean, there's no concern that this team can't score the ball. They put up 108 in the first game against Quinnipiac. We're going to see them score, but can they keep up long distance and can they compete against a team that also scores a lot? I think that's going to be a big question. But giving up 103 points on your own floor, I mean, that's not good, especially this early on in the season. That's a pretty rough look for St. John's. They're going to have to figure out something quick on the defensive end to keep that from ever happening again.
Yeah, they are shooting it better percentage-wise from last year. They're 38% from three, but just 17 and 19 attempts so far. Now, if you've listened to us over the years, this is a conversation that I've had before about my team. You need to shoot 25 threes a game in modern basketball today. And in that game against Alabama, where there won't be more possessions than that. And I guess there is something to maybe the team without the best ball pressure defense gives up a lot of layups, and you shouldn't take threes over layups. Okay, but you need to be in the 20s in three-point attempts, and they haven't gotten there yet. And I know they've scored a lot of points, and I know they're going to continue to pound the ball in the paint, but when you are losing, you need to make threes to come back. And they didn't do that enough against Alabama, and that's why they never really were a threat to come back. And, three over two, three is greater than two. It's been going around Alabama basketball Twitter, and that might be a headline that we need to monitor when play goes on for St. John's.
Yeah, that's crazy. Alabama had 81 field goal attempts in this game compared to 63 for St. John's. So St. John's, when they scored efficiently when they got the ball up, but you looked at Alabama got 18 more shots up, and they won by 7. So yeah, just getting more shots up is going to equate to probably scoring the ball when you can, shoot at a decent percentage.
All right, well, let's go on to the rest of Saturday as soon as this reloads for me. This, really solid first weekend all around for the sport. I think, we had the marathon on day one from Field of 68. That appears to be going to 24 hours next year, so that'll be fun.
Nice.
And
Back.
so I think actually, Mike, moving the Champions Classic out of the first week, and that'll be week 3, that'll be a week from today, may have actually helped some of these other games. But yeah, this was a really, really fun weekend. Saturday, we still had a couple other good games, including up at the Breslin Center, where John Calipari and his Razorbacks went in to play Tom Izzo and Michigan State. And Mike, as much as the last one was an offensive fest of a bunch of points, this one was the opposite. Back in the 60s we go. Michigan State 69, Arkansas 66. It appears that Michigan State is, you can change the names on the back of the jerseys. It's going to look the same. Isn't going to be the prettiest at times, but they're going to get the job done. And if you don't come in to their place ready to play, they're going to win. And they appeared to do it. Carr with 15. Cam Ward, another freshman, not the Titans quarterback, but his name is Cam Ward, 18 and 10 for the Spartans. And the Arkansas freshmen and returning players appear to have failed their first test. But what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's funny. I was texting a good friend of mine who's a big Michigan State fan, Michigan State grad, and he said, how is Michigan State favored in this game? There's no way we're going to be able to keep up with the firepower of Arkansas. When you look at, Michigan State doesn't have the most impressive names on their roster this year, right? But it's just one of those things. It just seems like you said, it's different names on the back of the jersey, but it's still the same team on the front. Michigan State's going to play really good defense. They're not going to shoot the three very well, and they're going to find a way to win. They made one 3-pointer in this entire game and just found a way to win this game against Arkansas.
Yep.
Against a team that, from any metric, is a more talented team. It's definitely more efficient at scoring the basketball on average nights. And they made 7 more threes than Michigan State did. Usually, if you win the 3-ball game by that much, you're going to find a way to win. But Michigan State plus 12 on the boards. It's just a physical Big Ten basketball team. It's what we're used to with Tom Izzo for over the last 20, 25 years. It just seems like, it's the same Tom Izzo team. It's always tough to play Michigan State, especially in the out of conference early on in the year. I feel like we've seen game after game where Michigan State hosts a Power Five program in November and in December, and it seems like Michigan State always just comes out on top.
Yeah, and this is they only lost once at home last year. It was to Indiana. And then they lost it once the year before at home, and that was the James Madison opening day loss, if you remember that.
I remember that.
So it's hard to go in there and win. I think it wasn't really fair to expect Arkansas to look as good as they probably will coming forward, but I thought this was just a poorly coached game from Calipari. I mean, they fell into all of the traps that Michigan State set. They took contested long twos, and they had a few chances there to tie it late with Michigan State missing some free throws and turning it over, and they didn't get anywhere close to a good shot. But the Calipari concerns did arise. I do still like Arkansas's roster. I think they got a ton of good players. I think they'll be pretty good, but when John Calipari does not have a distinct talent advantage, these sort of things tend to happen.
Absolutely. And I will say this, though. It's early on, the first week of this season, playing a road game for some of these teams is so tough. When you're talking about the travel, getting set up, playing in an opposing team's arena, especially a really tough place to play like the Breslin Center. It's tough early on for these teams. And you look at the winning percentages of the home games in these true home and home games that we have early on in the season, and it's astronomically favored towards the home team, especially this early on in the year. So, I don't want to take too much away and say, Arkansas is a disaster of a team. Look, I think Michigan State is also a really good basketball team. This is a team, I know you and Joe talk Big Ten. This is, would you say top 5, top 4 team in the Big Ten?
Probably. So. Especially over the last 2 years, Mike, we've said that Michigan State is like a great barometer for how good the Big Ten is because they're sort of the same team every year. Last year, the Big Ten didn't really have a great team, and Michigan State won the league by 3 games. I think it's, at Michigan State, the better years of the Big Ten has gotten dragged into the middle a little bit, but it seems like Michigan State's always in this 17 to 25 range. And if they have a great player, then they can get into the top 10 like they have a few times over the years, but they are just a good barometer for the league. That seems so I think if they're 5th or 6th, I think that's a pretty good sign for the league.
Yeah,
I think they might end up in the standings a little bit higher than that.
the more I'm looking at this team, the more I'm seeing just how much talent is here from the year before, right? So many of these guys have been in Tom Izzo's system. That's one thing I think Tom Izzo is doing better than any other coach in college basketball. It's at keeping his guys in the program for 2, 3, 4 seasons. I think it was a couple years ago, I remember where he didn't, I don't think he accepted any transfers because nobody left his program,
Yeah, he didn't have
right?
any
And so he just
spots.
yeah, there weren't any spots. There weren't any scholarship spots. So that's one thing I think that makes Michigan State so successful on a year-to-year basis is his ability to keep people home in East Lansing.
And he could probably use the portal a little bit more than he has, but he hasn't used it much, but he has hit on his transfers. If you look about it over
Yes.
the years, Tyson Walker was from Northeastern, sort of a solid player in a bad league. Tyson Walker turned into a Spartan legend. You had Joey
Yep.
Hauser who came in and gave you a couple good years. Now, the transfer portal's been a little, hasn't been great the last few years, but Trey Fort, the only guy who had a 3 in this game, he's their one transfer this year from Samford. So he
Yeah.
hasn't completely shut it out like Shaka Smart or Dabo Swinney in football have, but he is not using it as much as he probably could. And, you're probably asking him to tell some people to leave. And coaches do that, but Michigan State, they seem to be in a really good spot every year, whether they have
Yeah.
good players or a bunch of average players.
And also look out for Cam Ward coming off the
Yeah.
bench, not the quarterback for the Titans, but the true freshman from Upper Marlboro, Maryland, put up 18 points off the bench in this game. Really, his first performance, big performance, led the team in scoring. Uh, his Michigan State team also has some young talent to adding to this really deep freshman class. So this is an impressive team.
And last year it was Jace Richardson, one and done.
Yeah.
Spartan fans weren't as happy as, he wasn't really playing a lot of minutes early on, and he was clearly the best player on the team. That eventually changed when we got to Big Ten play. He was the focus there. I think we might be seeing something a little bit similar here. I think Ward can be that good. And
Yeah.
and Cohen Carr is looking better. But yeah, impressed with Michigan State still. They're just them. And when you get some freshman point guards, you get a couple of poorly drawn up X's and O's plays, they can win against anybody here. Mike, we had a couple other games here on Saturday. Gonzaga beat Oklahoma by 15 in Spokane. Don't really need to spend that much time on that one, but let's turn the calendar to Sunday. There were two big games, well, in addition to the Oklahoma State game that we sort of already talked about. We had two pretty big games here, both involving our teams, and they both won. So how about that? Indiana started off the day at 1 o'clock in Chicago at the Waterkeeper Alliance Invitational against Marquette, and it was Indiana 100, Marquette 77. Mike, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah. First off, who's Waterkeeper?
Somebody who
But
gave enough money.
Yeah, I guess. But I will say Indiana, I mean, what an offensive start to the season. A completely new era of basketball under Coach DeVries, playing with Tucker. Tucker had a great game shooting the ball. Had 27 points, 9 of 15 from the field. But a big key in this game was other players on this team that dominated. I mean, you looked at this team, you've got what is it, 8 players that played over 13 minutes in this game. So you've got a lot of guys that are getting some serious minutes for the Hoosiers this year. They're not relying on just Tucker DeVries. There are a lot of guys on this team that are able to get the job done.
Yeah, this was really, really fun to see. This sort of offense. I mean,
Yeah,
Marquette as a system defense might be the best in the country. Or not Marquette, but Shaka Smart defense
Shaka.
might be the
Yeah,
best in the country here over the last 10 or so years, and they were a step behind all game. I think, offensively, this was as good as it can look. I know they made shots, but they still missed a ton of open ones. You just get a lot of people who can shoot open shots, good things happen. And the DeVries stuff, like you said, Mike, he is a real problem for defenses. I think he's sort of going under the radar a little bit because he didn't play very much last year before his shoulder surgery. but he does not need that much room to get open. He's showing a pretty good driving and kicking game too. He had 2 assists, and Indiana had 27 assists on 33 made baskets. That was something that we didn't really see a whole lot of the last 8 years. I think it's unfair.
8 assists from Connerway and 8 assists from Wilkerson.
Yep. Wilkerson's
That's
supposed to be
crazy.
the guy who can only shoot it, and he got 8 assists and 2 steals and a block in this one against Marquette. So he's showing a little bit more of a game. And, they're still missing Nick Dorn, who's supposed to be the starting wing. And he's going to get worked into these next few bye games. But a lot to like from Indiana so far. And DeVries did have 27, Mike, in 30 minutes. And I told you this before we recorded. He was only plus 12 in those 30 minutes. So when he was off the floor, Indiana was still 11 points better than their opponent. And, he had some foul trouble. When he went off the floor, it's as if it was sort of inconsequential because they continued to get Sicily and Bailey and Wilkerson open shots. I think inconsistency is going to be a big part of this team. Defensively, they don't have the size, really, to compete with a couple of these big teams. But, I think we're going to see a lot of good this year from Indiana. But Marquette,
You don't want to get too high or too low on a certain program this early on in the year, but you look at, they're going to have a really good opportunity to kind of get their feet wet and get set. And a lot of players that are coming to the program going into conference play. So, they've got some tougher matchups, but nothing crazy. If they just win the games they're supposed to win, they're going to head into the conference season with a really good chance to make the tournament.
And they have a tough schedule now. The rest of their bye games sort of come quickly here. They play Kansas State at home. Based on how the Wildcats have looked, you'd expect Indiana to take care of business at Assembly Hall there. They do have Kentucky away at Rupp Arena.
That's a tough one.
And Louisville and Indianapolis. But if they can win the rest of them, they can get themselves to 10-2 in the non-con.
Yeah, 10-2 is going to be fine for them.
And they play Minnesota and Penn State in the early part of the Big Ten there in December. So, look, I think 12-2 is a really attainable goal for Indiana. And, one win probably cost them a spot in the tournament last year. So that's still of the utmost importance. But, a lot to like for Indiana. For Marquette, Mike, I think there's sort of a lot of things to be worried about here. I thought they had an all right offensive game. Defensively, not as sharp as they'd like, but in what appears to be a down Big East, it also appears that this might be the worst team that Shaka Smart has had at Marquette.
Yeah, I think it is right now. And we talked early on this year about how we didn't think Marquette was going to be anything special. I think we've really confirmed that. This is an incredibly underwhelming basketball team. They can still score the ball well, right? I don't think there's any doubt that they're able to get up and down the floor. And I think they'll be able to do pretty well in Big East play. But I think the real question is, how many tournament teams are in the Big East? I know last year we thought that the Big East out of conference couldn't get any worse, right? They were insufferably bad in the out of conference. They're probably worse this year.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about this Big East team. St. John's, they only lost by 7, but it felt like they lost by a lot more. Marquette gets run out of the gym by Indiana. This is not a good Big East this year.
Yeah.
Just not good at all.
And we didn't do a preview episode for it, Mike, so why don't I show the Big East on Torvik here and we can sort of go through what this looks like. They have the top two, and then Creighton appears to be like a solid team. And then after that, who is fourth? Right now, I
don't think it's Marquette.
Right now, it's Villanova and Bar Torvik right now, and then Marquette is fifth in this conference after a 23-point loss on a neutral floor against a team that wasn't even top 40 to start the year. So you have Providence, who lost a tough one to Virginia Tech. Xavier, who loses by 20-plus at home to Santa Clara. You have Seton Hall, who got into a few dogfights in bye games. And then Butler and DePaul. I think 3.5 bids is where the line is right now in this league.
Yeah, and I think Villanova's actually a pretty good team.
Yeah,
You know,
they
they've
looked a
dropped
little better than you would think.
yeah,
Yeah,
they dropped a tough one early on to Brigham Young in Vegas, but that was basically a road game.
yeah.
Um, so I think they have succeeded or exceeded my expectations for them. But yeah, the rest of the Big East, man, it's rough. I don't, and I would argue you probably maybe UConn can get a protected seed, but UConn might be the only Big East team with a protected seed.
Yep. And it if you think about how actually competitive this Big East has been the last couple years, like you know, UConn and St. John's aren't both gonna be 19-1 and split their games. Like they're gonna lose a few times too, and
Yeah.
that's probably gonna be not a good thing for this league. I think there's still a long way to go. I think Georgetown has actually looked pretty good so far. They seem to have taken a step under Ed Cooley. They went on the road and beat Maryland in Buzz Williams'
Yeah, that was a
first
good
home
win.
game. Um, they
They
have
dominated that too.
they have Malik Mack. They actually have a couple good players. Where I think fourth in the Big East is totally attainable for the Hoyas, but with what we've seen from the middle and the bottom of this league, it is not looking so good for the Big East. But Mike, we had another game on Sunday at down in Waco, and it was Washington, and Danny Sprinkle headed down there to play your Baylor Bears. We talked about Baylor a little bit. We talked about Washington a lot on our Big Ten basketball preview with Joe. We were really high on them, and Baylor just totally shut them down offensively. They have so many good pieces. They don't even get to 70, and it's Baylor who pick up the 78-69 win. Really, really good for Baylor.
Yeah, and Washington had a lot of players out in this
Yeah.
game.
Claude was,
Certainly,
yeah.
I think they did. Bodo was out for Baylor. That was also a big one. But you looked at Steinbach for Washington, only had 10 points in this game, and he struggled with foul trouble early on. I think he ended up playing the entire second half, and he was great getting rebounds. But that was really that all Steinbach could do in this one. He was really limited in his production in terms of scoring the basketball in this one. For Baylor. I think the one really encouraging thing is you had a lot of guys that got into double figures in this game. You had six guys in double figures. There wasn't really a clear star in this one. Cameron Card led the way, and he had ebbs and flows where he looked really good, but then he also had times where, it looked like he hadn't really been on the floor much, which he wasn't when he was at Tennessee. He didn't really play much at all. So I think there's a little bit more hope for Baylor going into week two of the season after this game. It's certainly more encouraged than after the UT-RGV game, where Baylor gave up 71 points to University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. Um, Not many people knew that was a school, but it's looking a little bit better. I think right now Baylor's looking for a little bit more production out of Tunde Yesufu. The McDonald's All-American, he's missed a lot of shots early on in this season. He's making some shots, but he's missing a lot. So looking for a little bit more there. But it seems like this team moves the basketball a lot better. And defensively, this team is so much better now than it has been the last couple of years. I think that was the biggest takeaway for me in terms of the positives for the Baylor Bears is that this team can actually play some defense. They've gotten some new coaching in to really help on the defensive end. So maybe Baylor can get back to, being a good defensive team like they were in the early 2010s.
Yeah, this was the formula for Baylor, right? We've said that they do not have the all conference talent that the rest of the Big 12 has. So it's going to have to be a team effort. It's not going to be a dynamic duo that is just so much better than everyone else and carries them to a bunch of wins. It's going to team effort. That obviously starts on the defensive end. And when you have six players in double figures, you're going to, that's at least 60 points right there. And obviously, more points for people who don't get to 10, more than 10. But yeah, this was impressive from Baylor. I think you
Yeah.
have, and maybe this is one way to look at it, Mike. Without the top end talent, you have to play defense. So you're just sort of going to learn how to do it, right? Baylor's had some really, VJ Edge come last year. Not a bad defender, but you have a lot of these guys who are going to the NBA, and they're going to be scoring a lot of points. But we've seen it over the years with coaches who have been in a place for a really long time where they've sort of had to tweak and change their identity a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Baylor
You've
has
seen that a lot.
they've gotten away from that a little bit since the national championship, and maybe they're just starting to turn back that way.
Yeah, absolutely. You looked at the early Baylor teams that were good in the mid, even most of the 2010s. Those were mostly defensive basketball teams that could shoot the three every now and then. And then with the season before, and then really started to come to fruition during the championship season, Baylor became a 3-point shooting team where it was like a 3-point shooting contest every night, and it felt like it was that way for several years, including last year where they shot a lot of threes, but they didn't make a bunch. But this year they get back to the basics, hiring Ron Sanchez, who is an assistant, top assistant at UVA, to
And the
basically
coach
be.
last year, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, he did. And effectively, he's hired as the defensive coordinator for Baylor basketball this year, if there was one. So it seems like Baylor's gotten a lot back to a winning formula that they had from, we'll call it 2010 to 2000 through 2017, really.
Yeah. So analytically, Baylor is really not jumping off the page, but in a much better spot than you'd think. They're 37th in Torvik here, as the YouTube viewers can see. But I've said it over the years when it comes to bracketology, Mike. Every game you play, it means less towards the numbers. If obviously you
Yes.
add one to the data point, everything becomes less valuable. It is much easier to hold on to a good analytical position than to rescue a bad one. And they're 37th right now. Like, that is 8-9 seed range. And I think they're probably, they're capable of a little bit more than what the computers are giving them credit for. But 2 games so far where obviously the defense wasn't as great as you'd like in the first game, but you're able to that was 23. It was supposed to be 23 and it was 15. So you lost some ground there. But in a spot where Washington was, you were only supposed to win this game by 5. So you get up to 9, get the numbers back in a little bit of a better spot. But that is going to be something to watch here for Baylor as they go to Players Era. They've got the 2 Big East teams, Creighton and St. John's. You'd love to try and get one of those and then see what happens in the third game there. And then you have Memphis on the road. That's not as hard of a game as it's been in the past. Memphis appears to have taken a little bit of a step back. So there is a path here through the non-conference for Baylor to have a legit shot of being like a fringe top 25 team in Big 12 play.
I think they're right there with Kansas. I think that's kind of the level. And who knows, maybe some things can develop. This team, one thing it kind of reminded me of a little bit was the 2018-2019 Baylor basketball team where they lost their first game of the season to Texas Southern. They lost to Stephen F. Austin that year. They had some really ugly losses, but the team grew and developed. And a lot of those guys ended up being guys that would propel a new national championship. Didn't have stars on that team, but they found a way to have a successful season and end up getting to the round of 32, which was a good year for them that year. So this could be a similar team to that.
Yeah, so let's stick with the Big 12, Mike, as we'll move to Monday. And there was Big 12 action up at the Pentagon in South Dakota on Monday night. That was Chris Jans and Mississippi State going to play TJ Otzelberger and Iowa State. And this one was all Cyclones. Up 18 at the half. They sort of cruised from there. A 96-80 win for Iowa State. Tamin Lipsey continues to be a really solid player, 25 points, 6 assists. You had Jefferson with 18, Blake Buchanan, the UVA transfer, with 13. They still have Momcilovic, who was pretty much a non-factor in this one, just 5 points in 16 minutes. But Iowa State cruised to a very easy neutral court win over a program that has sort of been the poster child for an 8 or 9 seed. I believe they've been, I think,
Yeah,
the
they were
same
9 seed
record,
last year.
same record 3 years in a row under Chris Jans in the SEC. Same record overall 2 of the 3 years. So to be sort of very clear of that position is a really good sign for Iowa State.
Absolutely. I think you look at for first off the Big 12. They've had a very good start to the year. You looked at Power Five games. The Big 12 was 5-2 in the opening week. So good start for a conference that had a down year last year. A couple of not great losses, but overall pretty good. You looked at Iowa State, just absolutely dominant in this game. At one point, led by as much as 25 with about 7.5 to go. So it shows a 16-point loss for Mississippi State. It was a lot uglier than that in this one. But you look at Iowa State just being able to get good performance coming off the bench, and even some of their starters. You look at some of these guys that started, only had 5 or 6 points, but so much production. Also coming off the bench in this one, Dominic Nelson with 11 points off the bench in 19 minutes. That's pretty good. But Lipsky's going to be having to lead this team, and he's done a great job early on in the year. This team also only had 9 turnovers. Won the turnover battle 9-26. 26 turnovers for Mississippi State. That's going to be a huge problem this year. A lot of turnover in this program. And they look, they're getting production basically playing 9 guys, 9 guys deep, but it doesn't help when you're not getting good performances. So not a great start for Mississippi State, but Iowa State absolutely dominant. Lipsy was great. Jefferson was great in this one. He had 18 of his own. Blake Buchanan, as you said, he also had good numbers. I think Osselberger, I think the number, Sean, is he has been better than his preseason metric every single year that he's coached, regardless of what level
Yeah.
it's been. So is this another year where they're going to be able to do that? I think there's a good chance.
Yeah, for me,
Um,
I think that they're like very much on BYU's level and maybe even Arizona and Houston's. I think there's a
yeah,
I think now Torvik is showing Kansas in fifth and Texas Tech in sixth. I think Tech and Iowa State and up is a pretty solid top five, and then I think you have your Baylor's and your Kansases after that. But yeah, I think that they might be able to pull themselves into a title race. And
yeah, yeah,
obviously, a lot has to go right. You got to stay healthy. You got to win games, but that's sort of been their thing the last few years. They've actually not been very lucky with health, and they've still won a lot of games. So, yeah, for me, I think that we had maybe thought that they were the top of Tier 2 in the Big 12. It appears that Tier 1 and Tier 2 have already sort of meshed together.
yeah, absolutely. This is already. I'm really excited for Big 12 conference play this year. I think it's just looking more and more loaded. Even though my Baylor Bears aren't going to be towards the top, it's going to be really fun to watch.
Yep.
What a treat it's going to be.
Oklahoma State and West Virginia have looked pretty solid.
They look
Um,
good.
and,
Yeah,
of course, one of those power conference losses that you were talking about, Mike, was UCF. So the middle and up of your league has one Power 5 loss. So, obviously
yeah,
the TCU loss to New Orleans, not
that's
good.
concerning.
But,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
that's okay. We don't like TCU.
yeah, they don't.
It's fine.
They're not going to be a factor in the tournament
Yeah.
conversation at this point. So, you see a lot of green on the screen there for Torvik numbers on the Big 12, and the league is looking like it's going to be shaping up pretty well. So, Mike, that was last night's game, and we're on to Tuesday right now, and we're not going to preview any of these games because they're going to be over by the time that this goes out. So, I think we'll end it there. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this one, and we'll see you next time.